financial advisor walk into a bar.
Oh, and then what happens?
Well, the question then came around is gifting equity to key employees or family members a good idea?
Ah, I see this a lot. It's a bit of an Oprah Winfrey situation. It's you get equity, you get equity, you get equity, you get equity. I see that a lot, especially in startups. People give away equity, I think, instead of paying people because they've got 100% business and it's a bit cheaper than paying people. And then in more mature businesses, you see it where you want to reward a key employee or whatever.
Yep.
You give them some equity instead of giving them some cash. And I've got some real concerns about it. I think people misunderstand it, and I think they're often too quick to give it away without really realising what they're getting into. Is that something you see?
But is that, I agree. From that point of view, if the business is being starved of cash, but they're trying to retain key people, is it very short-sighted where they go, actually, I'll just, if I give them some equity, that might retain them for longer. So they've got a bit of skin in the game and a bit more of an upside, which, again, is a fantastic way to incentivise people. But my concern always with that when people do it too quickly is not being clear around the sort of how you pull it together, so from a shareholder agreement, but also what happens afterwards if that person that may be very good to start with doesn't perhaps turn out to be who you thought they might have been along the way, because they think that their skill set is greater than what it may be as the business grows.
Yes, that's right. They might be good in the early product development stage, or they might be good at securing new clients for a while. But then when the business matures, suddenly they're dead weight, so to speak, or their skills aren't appropriate anymore, and they may by then own 20-30% of the business. And I think a lot of the business owners don't really realise what giving someone equity means for them in practice. First of all, they might not quite understand what equity is. And then, and what rights it gives rise to. For example, if you're a minority shareholder in a business, so if you own less than half the shares, you've got a right to some documents, and you've got a right to management decisions and voting and that sort of stuff. Yep. And so if you're used to running the business yourself as a 100% owner, you might think, oh well, I'm going to make a key employee a 10% owner, but then suddenly you're in partnership with someone which maybe you're not quite ready to do.
Yep.
You
need to share.
You have to share. That's right. And if you've been,
like
especially
sharing, I started this business on my own, and I want to make all the decisions, and I don't like sharing.
Yeah. Well, one thing that often happens is they say, well, there might be a big investment that the business needs. You might need to put money in to buy a new bit of machinery or computer system, or hunt down a big client or whatever. Yep. And the main owner might fund that, and then the minor owner might not want to put money in, or the minor owner might say, well, I don't want to reinvest the profits. I want the profits to be paid out to the team because that'll affect my dividends or whatever it is. And suddenly you got these tensions that you really didn't have before when the person was an employee. And so you can create tension.
Is that really where you start to see a lot of the complexity that people don't? Well, one, they may not have sought advice prior to sort of agreeing to some of those situations, but they don't always think of the multiple implications of once you've issued capital to a third party, what does that actually mean? And especially the minor shareholders, can they just become a real thorn in the side for the larger shareholder?
Absolutely they can. Yeah, absolutely they can. Suddenly they say, oh, well, I want to see the license agreement with your other entity that owns the intellectual property, or, I want to be involved in that, that negotiation or whatever. And they're entitled to those things. They're an owner of the business. They're not, they're not just a key employee anymore. They're an owner. And I think sometimes the intention is to reward a key employee by let's say we want them to improve the profitability of the business. So if they've got a stake in equity, they're going to try and improve profit, which makes sense. But really, that's more of a bonus. They could just be paid, a percentage of the net profit of the business, or they could be paid a bonus based on reaching certain KPIs or whatever, which achieves the same outcome, but without them becoming an owner of the business and have all these additional rights, which is fine if that's the plan. If the plan is to go into partnership with someone else where they're an owner too, no problem. But I think you've got to think through what does ownership actually mean, and I think it means a lot of things that perhaps weren't intended when people are giving away equity to an employee or giving away equity sometimes to a family member. The skin in the game thing I hear all the time. I want so-and-so to have skin in the game. But I also see people then end up in disputes with those people or end up really ruining what was otherwise a great relationship, particularly a family member, right? You might have had a great relationship with your brother and now suddenly equity. I mean, I've got 4 brothers and I can tell you, if I love them all, but if I went into business with them, we'd be killing each other in 5 minutes. That'd be the end of our family, having family relations.
The best draft of the shareholders agreement, but you can imagine which way that goes.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I would have drafted it.
All lean towards the one way, wouldn't it? Righto, boys.
Right. Hang on, this Alex Martin guy's got the he's the chairman and he's got the final vote on everything. I don't remember seeing that.
It's amazing that how he's drafted that.
Yeah.
But is that? But then if we look at that from that point of view, so if we turn around and say that we're trying to, there's an incentive for employees. Is
Sure.
there a way that an agreement can be put in place that means that they are given, quasi equity or phantom equity? I mean, people refer to it in both, in that they obtain a percentage of the business but don't actually own it. So it's just seen as, that you might gift them 10% phantom equity. So therefore, it's 10% of the profit, but they don't actually own the shares. It's just a formula to incentivise people.
Yes.
Or can you do it on the basis that it might be, 10% phantom to start with, but there is a potential opportunity in the years ahead or months ahead where that could be converted into real equity through a capital payment. Yeah. But there's an agreed formula. So is there a range of different options for people to start to look at that sort of stuff?
Yeah, all of that's possible. I mean, the general rule in sort of contract law is that if you can agree it, if you can dream it, you can document it, right? So anything's possible. You can certainly have, the Phantom Menace shareholder. So what is it? The Phantom Menace shareholder agreement or bonus arrangement or whatever. Really, what that is just a bonus. It's just the way the bonus is calculated is by reference to profit or whatever. So I think you can call them a phantom shareholder agreement, but I'd just call it a bonus agreement because it's just a bonus. It can go as part of an employment agreement or separate or whatever, and it can be calculated by reference to the profit of the business, the net profit or the EBITDA or whatever you want to use to pay someone a bonus that really has the same effect as a dividend. In fact, it gives them more rights in some ways, and they might be happier with it because it's not up. Often dividends are up to the discretion of the board, and the main owner might still control the board. So a phantom shareholder agreement bonus arrangement would allow the person to get paid regardless of whether a dividend was declared. So that's all possible, and then you can certainly do. Start off with this kind of bonus arrangement, and it can go on to being have an option to purchase shares and so on. All of that's possible, and I think they're all good ideas at different stages in a business's kind of life cycle. If you've got a key employee, by all means reward them. By all means link that to profitability. But I think you just want to be not giving them equity too early.
Yeah, because you kind of hear about it, and so really, if we look at the topic of today is gifting equity to key employees or family members a good idea? And I think sometimes that can also be a very sort of flippant way to kind of support people. It's like, I'll just do that. Whereas you get the other side, people are also saying, well, there's no way I would give any equity to anyone, and if they were to have equity, they need to pay some capital for it. So it can also then not allow the business to grow because the working capital is not available for that. So there's always a real challenge with the way, how you look to incentivise, positive and strong employees. It's always an interesting one when people, because if we look at what's going on today, in 2021, the retention of staff is going to be an enormous issue across the board. I think
sure.
everywhere, because people are, they're looking at opportunities and they're saying, well, where's the long term? I don't want to just work for a salary. If I'm working in this business and providing support and my skill set, sure, you pay me accordingly, but where's a little bit of the upside that sits in there, which is always a balance.
I understand that, but I think it can be difficult if you're paying someone a salary and then let's say you pay them 10% of the profit of the business as well. I query, I mean, it obviously depends on the business and the personality of the people involved. But if you're already on a salary, really, then you even if you do a bad job, you're going to get your salary.
Yep.
And if there's no profit of the business, you're still going to get your salary, right? And if there is profit, then it's only a relatively small portion that's going to come to you. So you think, is that going to make all the difference? Maybe it is. Maybe it'll change the way they see themselves. But I think, I'd go hard or I'd go home. I'd say, look, you either get a percentage of the business, get equity, and you get a percentage of the business, and you get nothing if the business makes nothing. And that's your entire incentive. Or you get a salary and maybe a KPI type bonus or whatever based on your own performance.
Because I can't see too many people, if the business makes a loss, you turn around and say to them, well, you would have got a 10% bonus if we made a profit, but we've made a loss this year, so can you tip in 10% of that loss to increase our working capital again?
Yeah, or can you forego your salary for this year? Because that's what I've done as the business owner. You know what I mean? I mean, if you're the owner of the business, you're not getting any money while the business is making a loss. And so if you really want to change someone's thinking, then that's the thinking you want. You want, well, hang on. And I think there's a huge benefit in thinking like a business owner. But I think if you just give someone 10% ownership stake in the business, I'm not sure it really achieves making them think like a business owner. Because, when your mortgage is on the line, right, when it's your money you've taken out of your mortgage to invest in the business, and if you don't win that new client or whatever it is, but make that sale, then you don't get paid next week. That's a different perspective, right? I mean, I know it, you know it. And our clients who are all business owners know it, and so when they're considering giving away equity, to an employee or a family member, I think they really want to think carefully about what that means and does it achieve what they want? Because often it doesn't. I think it's a.
To me, it's almost like a short-term hit. It's like a sugar hit to the employee sometimes. Unless the business is progressing towards a listing environment where there's a lot more capital and they want to broaden the shareholder base. But on some of the smaller businesses, I think that's always a challenge. I mean, sometimes it ends up being, I think it's just, you're better to pay them a bit more or provide them with a car or give them some other form of, incentive that's agreed to, overseas holiday when we can. Things like that may be beneficial rather than, the default back to, well, they've got skin in the game because they've got ownership. Well, is that really the right incentive to have for people?
Yeah, that's right. And do they have control over, how much the net profit is? It depends what their role is. But if they're a salesperson, I mean, they can maybe make sales and control the revenue. But, you as a business owner might decide to have a major expense that year, which might mop up all of the revenue, and then they might resent you for it. When before,
Correct.
If they just had a KPI to increase the revenue and you paid them the for that, then they might be happier. So it's really a horses for courses thing in terms of giving equity and a think ahead thing. I've certainly seen. I'm not sure that everyone, like business owners, know if they're thinking about giving equity to an employee or a family member. Do they know what rights that gives them? Does it gives them a right to vote? It gives them a right to appoint and disappoint directors, or at least a right to vote in relation to that. Which someone might say, well, hang on, I don't fancy that. And maybe you give equity to 3 or 4 people, and then they're suddenly voting in a block or whatever, which might cause you problems. And if your shareholder agreement doesn't have the right provisions in it, then maybe they outvote you. Which would
clearly
be very
in your brother's agreement, you'd make sure that the voting rights of 3 other brothers could not be combined to vote against the,
Yeah, I have to have a legal practicing certificate to vote on the board.
Correct.
It's in the fine print. They didn't read it carefully.
It just cuts them all out, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So then if we look at that, so what happens? So say there is situation does arise that someone has, issued the some equity. So again, we come back to, is gifting equity to key employees and family members a good idea? Because the other side of that is, say that has occurred, but you've also got to look at the other side of the equation that says, And I'm going to refer to these as the 4Ds. We've got a dispute, death, a disability, or a divorce. So if we've
they're fun Ds, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're brutal. But at the same time, what happens with each of those when something occurs? If there is a dispute and they're a minor shareholder because you've gifted them that, what are the rules that fit around that? And for people to understand, so they may have given it, but not looked on the other side about what do we do to either claw back those shares, and it's through a combination of those, or do I need to purchase them back from the individual, and how have you valued it?
Can I say on that, we see that all the time. So minor shareholders have special rights, special protections under the corporations law, and the law says you're not allowed to oppress that shareholder, which can be a whole bunch of things. Anytime you act in your own interests, not in the interests of the shareholders as a whole, then you might be seen as oppressing them. And so they can actually sue you and say, you've done the wrong thing, and potentially get the court-ordered relief, force you to do things like pay them dividends if you've acted in a way that's improper. And because it's this amorphous claim, it becomes an issue where, because there's uncertainty around what it means and doesn't mean, you end up in a dispute when otherwise you wouldn't. So by making them a minority shareholder, you've actually given them additional ammunition and additional uncertainty in the event of a dispute. Whereas if they're an employee, you've got much stronger rights as the 100% business owner. So in the first D's case, certainly giving someone equity makes life a lot harder for you.
Well, it's making sure that you've got your backstop that occurs, that if there is a dispute, we've agreed to this. So therefore, they would need to agree to, a dispute resolution methodology before they execute on the shareholding. That's how I would kind of look at it from that point of view, because that would always be my real concern for a lot of people is, it's good when it's good.
Yeah.
It's always good when it's good, but it's
and then
when
Dave comes
bad.
along with his 3 Ds, and it's the 4D, and it's the worst.
But this is, and so that's where we come into the next one, is what happens with death. So if you've got a key employee who, for whatever reason, just dies, does that individual's estate then have the same entitlements to that shareholding that individual did?
They do, yeah. That their interest, because it's an ownership interest, right? So they own property, and you can't, the property doesn't revert back to the company when the person dies. If they own property, it goes to their estate, so it goes to their husband, wife, children, whatever, who inherit that property, and you can't alienate, you can't take that property back without their agreement. So, it might make sense for them to sell it back, and maybe they will, but maybe they won't. Maybe they'll have a view about, getting rid of you and taking over themselves.
But that then goes back to the valuation.
Yeah. So that goes to the shareholder agreement. So that's the other point about giving someone equity. If you're going to give equity, then you want to have a shareholder agreement in place so you know what they can and can't do, what the protections are, and so on. And that should have a valuation.
It's these bloody lawyers, and all they want to do is write up agreements and just rip more money out of people.
You go, well, it was a couple of grand for the advice about equity, and now it's another couple of grand for the shareholder agreement. Before you know it, you're into Alex Martin for 10 grand.
Yeah. But again, that highlights the issue, though, doesn't it? Because it's just not a single piece of the puzzle. We need to paint out the full picture, and so therefore there may be multiple sections that need to occur for this to, and which then goes back to your much longer term planning of the business around what is it that where do you see it going to? Do you see it coming out to the wider market? Do you see, how are there ways that you can incentivise your employees in different ways as opposed to putting a shareholder agreement? And so it's being aware of what some of those options could be.
Yeah, and nothing wrong if giving them equity and having a good shareholder agreement in place, works for your business goals, then that's great. I'm certainly not standing in the way. It's really just a question of, is that appropriate for what you need? Are you just giving away equity without kind of thinking it through?
Yep.
So what's the third D? How many
The third
Ds?
one was disability. So say it's a key employee.
Yeah, okay.
Now, they may have an employment agreement that would deal with some of these issues, but if they become, and that the disability may occur through an illness, and therefore, the issue they may then revert to death. But at the same time, they're a key employee, do, how do we handle that going forward? Because if the disability may be in a position that they can't work,
Yeah.
but that could be multiple years, but they're
Yeah.
still a shareholder. But is there,
Yeah.
does that again come back to the shareholders agreement that says, well, if a person is, or do you need to tie it back into their employment agreement in the way
Yeah.
that it's drafted, that if they're not
Yeah.
available to work for a certain amount of time, there's a capacity to claw back their
Yeah.
shareholding, or there's an automatic ability to repurchase the stuff back?
That's why I was saying earlier, the important thing to understand what ownership means. So if they own shares, then that's a separate thing to their employment, completely separate. So, if they're an employee and they get injured and are not able to work, then they've got leave and so on and work cover and all of that. And that would just be dealt with in the normal way. And if they couldn't, in the long term, couldn't perform the work, then they couldn't work there anymore, right? So that'd be all fine. If they were an employee and maybe they had a bonus arrangement, they wouldn't be getting their bonus, and that'd be that. But if they're an equity owner, then if they're disabled, then they're still and not able to work, they're still an owner and they're still entitled to their dividends as the same as they would be. And that goes on forever until such time as they sell it or make a decision, And if they're unable to make their own decisions, then whoever's got their attorney or whatever is the person who makes the decisions for them about that. So it is possible to have a contractual right to reacquire shares and so on in the event of someone being injured and all of that. So all of that's possible, but it's certainly much simpler if you're really talking about someone's labour, then you're talking about their employment agreement. Whereas you're talking about their ownership, and often I think because I'm an owner of my business and I also work in it, and it's easy to get muddled. But working in a business and owning a business are two separate things. You can own a business and not work a day in it. That's no problem. We all do when we buy shares in the share market, just on a small scale. So you've got to think about it in those terms, I think, which really helps.
So then the fourth one is divorce, because matrimonial relationships never break down. They do. Yeah. But then it is the situation that someone that has been married and is now going through a divorce, that asset of that shareholding would fall into the class of matrimonial assets, and would then the family court have a capacity to obtain information from the company, because it's private versus public, to go back with an agreed valuation? I mean, is that a real dilemma?
You don't even need me here, Dave. You've just nailed it. That's absolutely right. That's exactly how it works. So that share would become part of the matrimonial assets, which would be, in dispute, or would be dealt with by the family court. And the family court first of all, would need evidence as to what it's worth. And so that might mean you get all the valuation, you get all the private financials of the company, and they all get hauled before the court, and there can be expert evidence arguing about what it's worth, especially if it's very valuable. And that's common in matrimonial asset division cases. They're often about, often the main point of contention is what's the value of the company, or because businesses are difficult to value, and you can have lots of different views about what they're worth. So often that's where the fight is. So certainly if
you get one party saying, oh no, it's worth X, and one party saying, oh no, let's talk down the value because it's not really worth it.
And they might even be fiddling the books.
Yeah, that's the real dilemma, isn't it, on that?
Absolutely. And in fact, what we often see is you see that there's a genuine misunderstanding of the value of the business, because one party might be at home with the kids, the other party might be in the business, and the party at home with the kids might be living a pretty good life, drive a nice car, everything's good, and the person working in the business might see that the business actually has a lot of debt and a lot of problems, and we're about to lose a major client or customer or whatever. And so the person at home with the kids might be thinking, well, life's pretty good, this business must be pretty valuable. And the person at the office every day is going, well, this business is worth nothing.
Looking a bit shaky.
It's all looking a bit shaky, and they might not be fully honest with their partner about all of that. And so there might be a genuine misunderstanding, without anyone being vindictive, but a misunderstanding about what the business is worth. And suddenly if that's happening to your 10% shareholder, you're the 90% shareholder who started the business, and might be saying, oh, now I'm getting dragged into all of this. This is all very bad. I don't want to be part of this.
But does that occur? Have you seen those circumstances where there is the majority shareholder is sitting there as, let's say they're the founder, and they have, provided equity to either a family member or an employee. Again, the gifting of equity to the key employees or family members is that a good idea? Is that the real challenge, especially with divorce? How do we address that? Because all of a sudden, as you say, the majority shareholder can get dragged into this, especially if the business is a private business, but it's actually worth quite a lot. Even though you can say, it's only 10%, but if the business turns over, let's say it's, $300 million, it's actually worth a lot of money.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We just did a litigation over a childcare business, and our client owned 12.5%, and that settled for 1.5 million. Right,
Yeah.
so that's a pretty juicy settlement, and that was real over what the shares were worth. So they can certainly be worth a lot. And not only do we see that kind of stuff, Dave, but we get subpoenaed. Like I've been subpoenaed to produce records that I have relating to the company finances. Now, obviously, if there's a privilege that applies to lawyers and so on, but people get subpoenaed. So you as the main owner, if there was a family dispute, you as the main owner of the business might be subpoenaed to produce all of the records, the financial records of the business, so that they can establish the value of the 10% share. And you'd have to hand over all of those. You wouldn't be able to defend that.
So you're really in a position. So you're saying in that situation, I'm the 80% shareholder and I've got two other shareholders at a 10% apiece, and one of them is getting divorced.
Yes.
There would be, if we were subpoenaed, there would be an obligation for us to provide the full financials of the business over a period of time to support the valuation process for the divorce settlement.
Exactly. That's exactly right, yeah.
Wow.
So that's something that probably you don't really think, but you can actually subpoena any third party who has documents that are relevant to a proceeding. So you can subpoena a bank, an insurance company. I mean, they get subpoenaed all the time, but you could certainly subpoena, people often, like in divorce, they often subpoena the rest of the family, because it might be that, someone's getting divorced and they might be in business with their brother, and the brother might get subpoenaed. So you have someone sort of, someone's sister-in-law might be subpoenaing them, or brother-in-law might be, whatever it is. So it can be pretty.
Is there any way around that, or that's just one of the risks you need to accept? Which again comes back to our question: is gifting equity to key employees and family members a good idea? Now, clearly, amongst those 4 Ds of dispute, death, disability, or divorce, to me, from the discussion we're having, divorce is a nightmare for you.
It can be, yeah. So you would have to hand over. There's no defence to it. If you're a third party and you've got documents that are relevant, you'd have to hand them over. Now, they're only allowed to be used in court for the purpose for which they were given. They can't be used for other purposes. And I think, you'd be in contempt of court if you did that. So I wouldn't be too worried about confidentiality or whatever. But it's, a hassle, and you have to do it, and, you get minimum compensation for it. And that's just something you have to live with. I think the lesson is that when you're giving equity to somebody, you're giving them, you're taking on a major kind of issue. It's a major decision, and so you want to think through, is the equity that I'm giving, am I getting is the company and is the business getting the value out of that partnership with that person, And if you're really just trying to reward them with a bit of extra dough, then there's other ways to do that. But if you're taking on a major business partner, they have their own customers, they, are doubling the size of your business or whatever, then, maybe giving them equity is a great idea. And maybe if you get subpoenaed, you can live with that. But you really want to be getting the kind of value equation right when you're giving out equity. When maybe, I often think that my clients who are giving equity should just be giving cash. Because, if they can afford it, it's clean. Yeah, that's right. Just say, here's some money.
Is that really where we sort of sit on that sort of scenario? If we're looking to gift the idea of giving equity across, or even it may be in a form of compensation, or that they're purchasing the equity, you're still exposing things. So it comes back to the assessment that says, what's the long-term objective of offering equity to a third party, and do I get the commensurate return by allowing that to occur going forward? Is that how you would kind of put it together?
Exactly. Yeah. What am I getting out of this, and is it worth it? Given all of the other factors that come along with it, which I think sometimes people are not really aware of or haven't really thought through.
I think there is certainly less of that equity option given, unless it's a business that is in a rapid growth phase, but they may then take on a private equity for funding, or or structure it in such a way that they go to a wider market for investors to come in, and the major shareholder sells down to a percentage for that reason, and set it up, set their corporate structure up in such a way that that doesn't occur. I think as a private, business that may not be looking at that particular path, I'm with you. It goes back to the decision around what's the best way for me to, incentivise some key employees. You know what? Maybe it's just cleaner and easier just to write a bigger check.
Yeah, if you've
or
got
give
if you've
them
got
other
cash.
incentives along the way.
Yeah. I even sometimes giving them incentives like a holiday. I mean, we've had a client who gave holidays away to key salespeople who loved it, and they ranted about what a great business they were. And the holidays, in the scheme of things, weren't worth all that much, but they were sort of a bit more thoughtful and a bit more, fun. And they took their partners on the holiday, so the partners thought their partner's boss was pretty good, and all that sort of stuff. It really, and then there was a bit of bonding on the holidays and all that sort of stuff. So there was all these other benefits, which might be, a more effective way of incentivising or encouraging, the right culture in your company. One thing I wanted to ask you is what about succession? What about handing over to, your son or daughter or your nephew or niece or whatever, in terms of gifting equity to family members? If you're planning on handing over a business to you're the next in line, if you like, in the family, does that put a different kind of spin on how you'd see? Because you're not just going to give them cash; you really want them to take ownership.
Yeah, there's a real balance with that, and I suppose part of that becomes the discussion around, if we're taking it from the founder, first generation, down to second.
Yes.
Where is the business going? Are any of the family members working inside or outside of the business? How do we equalise that approach?
Yes.
What is the transition? Do you deal with it with a, traditional model of husband and wife? They start and own the business equally, and then the children are involved and some are not. It comes back to, do they want to keep the business in the family?
Yes.
So therefore, is there a way that it might be, they may transition part of the ownership, 25% to each of the children. Now, some of them may or may not be working in the business if there's 4 kids.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that? But then the parent needs to make sure that they still have an appropriate income stream to support their lifestyle.
Yes.
But that really becomes, that's not a simple discussion. That's very much around, well, what would we like to see happen with the business, and how big is the business, and has the business being able to provide a cash flow to then build assets away from the business? So therefore, an exit from the business may not be such a dramatic. It may be very easy for them just to literally close the doors and not actually pass it on to anyone of any value, because that it's just the way it is. Others, it's like, no, this is a phenomenal business that has continuity in place, and kids want to remain involved in the business, and it just becomes a natural progression. But the cascading of ownership may not occur until the original shareholders are either deceased, or they make a very measured approach in how they cascade that ownership down to give the next generation the management and the control of the wider group. But the parent, who is from 1 to 2, has an adequate income stream to support their lifestyle, but they still want to be involved. So there is no perfect or out of the box solution. It really comes back to, how do they want to deal with it? Because there'll always be circumstances that occur that some of the kids maybe want to be involved, or the children's spouses may actually be very active in the business. So the immediate family is actually not the one in the business, it's an in-law. And that's a good or bad thing. But then there also could be some other family members who are equally involved. They may sit on the advisory board of the business if it's a large enough size, but they work in a completely different industry and either running their own business or work in something else, or they may be in the arts, or they may be in whatever it is. Yeah. But they're still part of it, but they're not active in it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we see that sometimes they go and do something else, and then they come back to the nest 10 years later, with a whole bunch of skills that and different experiences and so on. And maybe they come back with their MBA, and Dad says, I don't care about your fancy MBA, you know.
Pretty much.
Yeah, there's a bit of
You got
that.
your hands
Or,
dirty.
yeah, that's right. But they actually might be a very good, capable manager. So that's I mean, handing over to a family member for the purpose of succession is a whole different discussion.
That's a very big discussion, and there is a
Yeah.
range of different paths that can be, kind of taken and spoken about in that area.
Yeah.
And one of them might be that no immediate family member, they might work there whilst they're at school and studying, but post
Yeah.
that event, that there may be a requirement that they have to go away and work somewhere else for a minimum of 5 years just to get some
Right.
additional experience.
Yeah.
Or they may
Yeah.
they may agree to, get them overseas to work with a different business that then
Yeah.
gives them those broader skills that they may not have ever been able to achieve in Australia. So
Yeah.
there's a whole range of options around that, but I still think some of the challenges that we've spoken about, dispute, death, disability, and divorce,
Yeah.
equally applies to immediate family members as it does even just an employee or other wider family members.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
challenges are still going to be there. Like that can still happen. So therefore, what's my broader family succession strategy, and how do I want to pass assets down and across to family
Yeah.
members? And so discussions and as we keep saying to people, the more you talk about it, the clearer it starts to become. But it also starts to help you develop the purpose of what the business is for.
Yes.
So it's not just
Yeah.
about, growing wealth. That's one aspect. But certain businesses have done exceptionally well that part of that engagement then becomes, well, what do we do as a business to support our philanthropic interests? How can we
Yeah.
provide to give back to the community that's been very supportive to our business? And so that's
Yes.
when you really start to get into a very different, succession around, do they hold equity or do they hold it in a different structure? And
Yes.
there could
Yeah.
be two brothers that own it. So the uncle's there, but now one member's gone, but that uncle's still there. But are the two sides of their family? How do we kind of
Yes.
manage that?
Well, there's
So-
some well-known business families in Victoria that fall into that category, I think.
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
someone's passed away and now their family still runs it. That's right. But that's really a bigger discussion than just, say, giving equity to an employee or some family member in a kind of a flippant way. But I think in terms of, if you're looking at succession, it's a much broader planning thing to do.
Yes,
Than just,
yes.
Yeah.
But again, I think part of the, if we talk about, the gifting of equity to key employees or family members, is also about the strategy around your staff retention. How do you keep your team together, and how do you attract strong people? So that's a very different approach. But that's the same. I think that approach is still going to be with family members. Just because you're a family member doesn't mean that you should get an automatic right to work in the business.
Yeah, sure.
To me, you still need to go and prove that you're a capable individual and that you're the right person, and you're bringing back to the business if you've been away, or if you're making an application to join the business. There's still got to be a role there that's appropriate for you, and not because you happen to have the same surname.
Yeah, well, that's right. And you've got to earn the respect of your colleagues, which you're not going to do if you can't do that. I've seen it certainly very tough, I think, for young people, especially when they're very young, coming through, if they've got their, the son or daughter of the founder, and it's perceived that they have an easy ride, although they may actually have a tougher ride than anyone else.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't fancy it. So I think, mate, is the lesson in all of this: you just run a business yourself, then you sell it, and then you give the money to your kids, and you don't worry about it.
Well, that makes it very simple. But again, it comes back to what's the purpose of the business, and do you want to grow the business to have a business that functions without you there, or is it a sense of your own identity, or is there a real passion around it? I mean, there are so many different paths that you can take when we start to look at some of these things. But I think sometimes for some people it is, I'll just give them some equity to keep them incentivised. And I think through the discussion, there are a range of options available. And I do think it's important for people to understand what those options can be. And the default is not always equity for someone to keep them involved. There's different ways to incentivise them along the way. And if you've started the business and grown it and built it, it's always hard. You don't want to just give it away.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, my experience has been, and of most of my clients, has been that good team members, family or not family, employees or whatever, if they're committed, they're committed, and that giving them 5% equity or a bonus, I mean that's nice and that's great, maybe you want to do that, but I don't think it turns someone who's not committed into someone who is committed.
Yep.
And as I sort of mentioned before, if you want to turn them into a kind of a business owner with business owner mentality, then it needs to be a bit more severe than just, well, you get your salary plus 5%. You want to say, well, then suddenly you got to have it all on the line, if you like. If you want to change their thinking to just to a business owner's kind of thinking, and then maybe you don't want to change their thinking to a business owner, because if they're a business owner, maybe they'll nick off and start their own business.
Well, possibly, but what do
Yeah.
they say in the research that money's like number 4 or 5 on the list of requirements?
Yeah.
For, just because you offer someone more money doesn't make them, enjoy what they're doing. There's a whole range of other issues that, and I think even over this COVID period in the last 12 or 18 months, that's even highlighted that more so, that I think people are really assessing, what's important to them when they're working inside a business. What does that mean to them? Is it the money, or is it, well, actually I prefer a little bit more flexibility and ability to be able to work in different environments or to spend time with young families? And again, there's all sorts of different ways that we can always look at supporting people. This is just one aspect that I think people really need to consider their options when they're thinking about it.
Yeah. So should they get financial advice before they give, if they're thinking, I'm going to give 10% to my key salesman or to my brother or whatever, should they get financial advice before they do that?
I don't think it's just financial advice. I think there's 3 advisors involved in this. One is financial advice. The other is an accountant, because of the tax structuring situation. And I also think it's a lawyer. So I think from a collaborative perspective, all 3 need to be aligned, in that it's just not one discipline, because it will have implications across all of them. So it is very much having that discussion and bringing the multiple parties together to understand, again, what's our end objective? What's the purpose of doing this? That will then help drive the direction where it could be. That's, I think, is the best solution, and not just as saying it's either a financial advisor or a lawyer. I think it's both, with the accountant as well.
Yeah, there certainly is different
structure.
Yeah, I'm no expert on the accounting side of it, but I know there's lots of ways you can structure it in accounting. So depending, it might be the employee's paying the tax, or it might be that you're paying the tax, or whatever. There's lots. I know they had these, employment. Well, there's lots of different ways and then but the tax rules around employment share plans changed and made them less attractive and so on. I think at my old firm years ago, I had some shares which I think I had to give away when I left the firm, which was didn't make any difference because the shares weren't worth anything anyway.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Not without me there, they weren't.
Well, that's where the real premium was when you were there. I mean, once you walked out the door, the premium was just removed.
That's right.
No one wants to sort of own those shares after you've gone.
Yeah. Mm. So
is there anything you want to kind of wrap up with on this particular topic?
Yeah, so giving equity to employees or to family members, all I'd say really is that's an A-OK thing to do, absolutely, if you sort of think it through, and that ultimately what you want to do is go into partnership. That's an ownership. You want to give ownership stake to someone for their long-term involvement in the business as a partner with you, not as a employee, not as, the uncle that you want to look after, but as a partner with you in the long run. If that's the plan, then go ahead, but just think it through. If that's not the plan, then I think often the answer is just give them some sort of bonus if you want to incentivise them, a KPI or whatever that they can influence themselves. Something that's right. That if they're a salesman, a sales target or whatever it is, so that might be more appropriate. And I often talk people into giving their employees bonuses instead of giving them equity. And if you can afford to do that, I would do that, because I think in the long run that's better in most cases.
Yep. I mean, my wrap up on this is I think it's fantastic that a business owner is thinking around ways to incentivise key employees, but equity is not the only option. And so bring the ideas to the table and seek advice from multiple parties to determine what the best outcome is, being based upon what is the purpose of what you're trying to achieve for the long term. So it's just part of the mix and part of the puzzle that you're putting together. It's not going to be the only piece and the key piece. It's a piece of the puzzle. So
that's very deep.
Thank you, Alex. We like to be deep. But look, again, I think if it's a really interesting topic, and I think if people want to reach out and continue on this to be more specific to their circumstances, I think it's important that they kind of reach out to either of us. So I'm sure we will have our contact details within the show notes, and we'll pick it up from there. So, Alex, once again, an absolute pleasure. Lots of banter, lots of bullshit, and we like that. Nothing like having.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. I think most of the bullshit came from my side as usual.
Correct. All right, we'll see you at the next one.
See you at the next one.
Thanks, Alex.